Welcome back to the Florida Cable Telecommunications Association's Capital Dateline. I'm Brad Swanson, your host. I am once again joined by Jim Saunders, Executive Editor of the News Service of Florida, who's here to tell us a little bit about what's happened in the previous week in politics, but also we'll look ahead a little bit to see what's coming up. But we're going to spend most of the time on recent events. So, the Democrats and the Republicans are preparing to choose a new chairman. I'm sure they're coming to this with just open arms and hugs and just ready to, sing Kumbaya and all agree on one candidate.
It's funny how that works.
Is that happening? Where's the action
It's
happening?
definitely not happening on the Democratic side. This weekend, ironically, very close to each other down in the Orlando area, the Democrats and the Republicans are holding the conventions or conferences, and the main point of business at both of them is going to be electing chairs. The Democrats particularly have had it's kind of messy. Mm-hmm. It seems to be messy about every 4 years when they do this, but Allison Tant, who's been the chair over the last 4 years, decided not to run again for the chairmanship after this year's elections, which were not very successful for Democrats. And they have 5 candidates trying to succeed her. It's caused a lot of clashes within the party leadership in terms of who to support, and so that's gonna play out this weekend.
All right. So who are the candidates? What are we looking at?
I think the most prominent one, the one who's gotten the most attention so far, is Stephen Biddle, who's a major fundraiser out of Miami-Dade County. He did a little maneuvering to be able to be eligible for this. He had to become elected a state committeeman, which caused some, again, maneuvering and some angst down in Miami-Dade County. He essentially beat out former Senator Dwight Bullard for that post down there to be able to run for chairman. But Dwight Bullard had a trick up his sleeve. He became a state committeeman from Gadsden County, which is up here by Tallahassee, to be eligible to run.
It's the same neighborhood, though, right?
Well, it's a little different.
Okay.
I mean, only about 400 miles.
Right.
But
okay.
and then similarly, Alan Clendenin, who's been a party leader for quite a few years, was trying to be eligible to run for chairman. He was not. He did not get elected to the state committeeman post in Hillsborough County, where he lives. So he moved to Bradford County, which is up by Stark.
Right.
Includes Stark. So he's eligible to run. Lisa King, who is a party activist in Duval County, is a candidate. And Leah Carius, who is the Osceola County chair, is also a candidate.
And those last 2 candidates live and are from where they're...
As far as I know.
Okay.
But
okay,
I mean,
okay.
Surprises continue for me.
Okay.
But seriously though, I mean, this is the Democratic Party has been in kind of disarray. They had a very unsuccessful election season. I don't see how you can view it any other way. Right. I mean, Hillary Clinton lost Florida. That was the big race. Marco Rubio defeated the Democratic candidate Patrick Murphy in the U.S. Senate race. Congressional seats, Democrats picked up, I think, 1 or 2 net. Similarly, in the state house, Senate. I mean, but they did not get the victories they wanted this year. There's a time of turnover there, and they're going to put a new chair into place. I think the question is whether that chair can bring together the party. Also, whether they have a strategy to get things back on track. I mean, the Democrats have been out of power in Florida pretty much for the past 2 decades, with some exceptions, a few exceptions.
Yet they have a registration lead by, what, it's like 100,000 people or something
They do have a registration lead. It's narrowed over the years. One thing that was interesting, we had a story last week that found that 12 counties will not even be able to vote for the chair of the Democratic Party, the Democratic leaders in those counties, because they don't have executive committees. Right. They're all rural counties. Small, the votes they would contribute to that race are not that large. But symbolically, right, it shows that there's 12 counties that essentially don't have a Democratic organization in them. And so, I think that's sort of symptomatic of some of the problems the Democratic Party has had. They have, they've largely written off large parts of the state during the recent elections, particularly rural areas, North Florida, those sorts of areas. So I think the next chair, whoever that may be, has a big job in front of him or her.
And ironically, the last voters, one of the narratives about how Donald Trump won was he performed extremely well in those rural areas where the Democrats aren't lacking voters in those areas. So potentially there's both a winning strategy there if they can organize those rural markets. And
well, I'm not sure anybody thinks they're going to win those counties, but they certainly could pick up more votes than they have been picking up.
Right.
And I think another thing to keep in mind is 2018 is coming fast, and Bill Nelson's going to try to defend his Senate seat. There's going to be and he is the only statewide Democrat out there. There's a gubernatorial race. There are 3 state cabinet races. I mean, it's a big election, and historically, Democrats have not done as well in these off-election years, non-presidential years. So they've got a big job ahead of them to try to keep Nelson in office, and try to pick up the governor's race or some of these cabinet seats. It's going to be difficult, and whoever the new chair is going to have to come in, bring the party together, and come up with a strategy really fast.
Yeah, I mean, I think bringing together disparate viewpoints and characters. I mean, Tampa's just as different from Miami as Orlando is from Jacksonville, or the rural markets are from your metropolitan markets.
Well, and one thing I think we saw during this presidential election, it's not anything new, but Republicans in the end, they may bicker and they may fight, but on election day, they tend to come together. They did it for Trump this year. I mean, a lot of Republicans didn't like Trump. They still don't. Yeah. But when it came time to make that choice, they actually, bubbled him in. Yeah. I'm not sure the Democrats are that, they don't come together like that. And they have the numbers if they could, but they have not.
Well, let's pivot there because we're talking about Republicans and Democrats now. So the Republicans are also going to select their chairman. Is that as multifaceted or contested by as many parties? What do we see over there?
Well, there's 2 candidates. One is the incumbent chairman, Blaise Ngolia, who is a state House member from down in Spring Hill, I believe. And then he's being challenged by Christian Ziegler, who's a state committeeman down from Sarasota County. We're not hearing as much about that race as we are the Democratic side. There has been some turmoil in the Republican Party over the past few years. Ngolia unseated Leslie Dewar, who was the former chair, and she had support from Governor Scott. Ngolia, a couple years ago, came in and ran a campaign, and he won the chairmanship. Now, this caused some problems within the party. The Governor Scott sort of backed away from the party.
And tradition holds that the governor in power, arguably is the top officer in the party structure, and they are, the differences in the past had been, not even a hair's width.
We clearly saw that when Jeb Bush was was the governor. He had chairs like Al Cardenas, who was very close to him. Charlie Crist, when he was a Republican and governor, he installed Jim Greer. Now that didn't turn out so well, but still, your point is to your point. The chairs were close to the governors, and that is not the case right now in the Republican Party. But I do think, too, it's a little bit hard to argue with the success that Ngolia had this election cycle.
Right.
I mean, he delivered. I mean, the Republican Party, despite whatever divisions there may have been, they had a successful election cycle. Right. So he's got that to argue in his favor. I also think he has support from House leadership, which definitely doesn't hurt in this in this environment.
Especially when you're a House member. So that's not bad either.
He's a pretty hard-charging guy too.
Well, if Governor Scott decides to run for higher office, potentially Senate, that's been a rumor that's out there. What will the re-election of Blaise mean for Governor Scott? I mean, as you said, Republicans tend to fall in line versus fall in love.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's going to, whether they can make up, or whether that some of those gaps can be made up over the next couple of years. I think it's too early to tell. I think we've seen with Governor Scott, though, that he has not been afraid to run against the establishment of the party.
Yeah.
I mean, in 2010, he came out of nowhere, had no support from the Republican establishment, or very little, and he defeated their establishment candidate, Bill McCollum, in the primary. He went on to win. And so in this election cycle, this past election cycle, he was never a big supporter of Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio. And immediately after the presidential primary, he was fully on board with the Trump campaign. So, Governor Scott is a different political animal than I think we've seen in the past. Part of it, just let's be honest, I mean, he's got a lot of money, and he's been willing to commit a lot of his personal money into his races. But also, as a sitting governor, if he decides to run for U.S. Senate, he's going to have money. People will contribute to his campaign. So, but he's always marched to a little bit differently in these campaigns.
Yeah. I think the entire political establishment will watch to see how that plays out, because if you're running against the Republicans or the Republican candidate in that, you're going to want to pay attention to how close is that relationship. Conversely, if you're on the Republican side, the idea is if you're the citizen in Florida that's a Republican, you want those organizations to work together to win for their candidate.
Well, we also don't know at this point who if he's going to definitely run. I mean, a lot of people think he is, but also if there are any other candidates out there who might challenge him. So all that's going to be playing out probably within months.
Yeah, for sure.
Because people are going to have to start lining up.
And the dominoes start falling, and the deck chairs will begin to be shuffled. Okay, so let's start talking about policy that's happening in Florida. It's an issue we covered last week. Sadly, we had a shooting in Fort Lauderdale occur last week, which that issue is undoubtedly, or that event undoubtedly, is going to affect a bill and the discussion that's currently happening in the House and the Senate right now.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the bill, and then give us your thoughts on how potentially the shooting might affect that.
Well, Senate Judiciary Chairman Greg Steube has proposed a very far-reaching bill about gun rights. Included in that bill are allowing people with concealed weapons licenses to carry openly in public on college campuses, and maybe most pertinent to this discussion, in airport terminals, not beyond the security checkpoints of airport terminals, but in the public spaces, including baggage claims, areas where this shooting in the Fort Lauderdale airport occurred. Immediately after the shooting, Senator Steube was interviewed and said, this is why we need this bill, is so that people can defend themselves in these public spaces when someone else starts firing away like this person did down in Fort Lauderdale. I think that's going to be a major point of discussion as this gun bill goes forward. This gun bill is very controversial. I mean, there's a lot of controversial pieces to it. And I think the argument is going to be made by Steube, by the NRA, by other supporters of this, that that you need to allow people to carry guns in airport terminals and other public spaces like that to defend themselves. The other side is going to argue.
Right, the anti-gun folks are
going to I mean, they're going to argue, as they always do, is that, do you really want to introduce a whole bunch of people with guns into a very crowded, chaotic, baggage claims could be chaotic with nobody shooting. I mean, a lot of people milling around. But do you really want to introduce a bunch of people firing guns in a crowded, potentially chaotic space, and will that do more damage than banning them?
Right.
So
it's a tough argument to digest on either side.
Well, and both sides are going to make the cases forcefully. One of the things that this reminded me of was 2 years ago when there was this campus carry, the bill that would allow people to carry on college and university campuses, when it was debated, came right after a shooting at Strozier Library at Florida State University. And that issue, that shooting, came up again and again on both sides of that debate, and still probably does, but in terms of allowing people to carry guns on college campuses. And the arguments were very similar. If there are other people armed in the library, would that have done good or bad?
Well,
so, I think we're going to be seeing this airport shooting will ripple through this debate.
Well, and the other part of the narrative is going to come down, and we hadn't kind of gone down this road, but the fact that the gunman potentially followed TSA rules and requirements on the checked, or allegedly, on the checked luggage, then I think the proponents will argue, well, if somebody can follow the law and introduce that type of firearm into that location, how do we protect our folks? Obviously the other side will say, no, that's exactly why we need to remove guns from the environment entirely. Well, that's a factor.
I also think all these facts are becoming about this guy are becoming they're coming out steadily. But it sounds like he may have had some mental illness issues, mental health issues as well. That's another debate, another issue that keeps coming up in these gun debates is what do you do about people who have mental health issues? Should they have guns? Right. So the issue that you raise could be a part of this argument. The mental health issue could be a part of this argument. So I don't think as tragic as it was in Fort Lauderdale and is in Fort Lauderdale, I think we're going to be hearing a lot about it.
So are they going to debate that bill this week?
Well, interestingly, Stubbe's committee was supposed to take up the bill on Tuesday, the Judiciary Committee. They have pulled it from the agenda. Now, they did that before this shooting, so that isn't related to this shooting incident in Fort Lauderdale. Senator Stubbe said that one of the members of the committee, Rene Garcia from down in Miami-Dade, could not be at the meeting. He wanted a full committee there to discuss the bill. But we're 2 months out essentially 2 months out from the start of session. There's plenty of time to bring that back in committee, whether it be this month, next month. And the House has always been more open to these sorts of gun bills. So I think we're going to get a full airing of these issues here in the next couple of months.
Yeah. All right, so we move off of guns, and that's what we've seen. That we've kind of looked in the past. We got a couple things coming up. So before our time ends today, talk to me a little bit about what you see coming up this week.
Well, there's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the House and Senate committees are meeting, and there is a full panoply of issues, big issues that they're starting to set the stage for the 2017 session. Death penalty, big issues with that. Workers' compensation insurance, big issues with that. Medical marijuana, implementation of the constitutional amendment that passed in November. Economic incentives, there's going to be discussion about that, which is going to be a big, and just generally there's going to be a budget discussions in various committees. They're trying to get an idea of where they are money-wise and where they're going to go. Outside of Tallahassee, Visit Florida is meeting this week down at Disney World, and we've talked about that quite a bit, but they need to find a new CEO pretty fast. As going into session because they're looking for money from the legislature. So there's going to be a lot of activity in the middle of this week particularly.
Well, we'll stay tuned for next week's show to see where the events of this week land. And as always, thank you for joining us here in our studios. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.